Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. I'm your host, Travis Stock, and this is a space for men who are ready to move beyond outdated models of masculinity and into something more honest, connected, and whole. Last year, I held a series of conversations on the New Masculine where I checked in with some of the men I've coached utilizing the Equus coaching experience. I love bringing two of my passions together, experiential learning through horses and supporting men's personal growth, so you can see what makes it so great. So much so that I wanted to do more of it, which leads me to this episode. But we're putting a little twist on it by talking with a professional horseman who's learned a lot from horses in his own ways. My next guest, Tik Maynard, is a horse trainer, leading voice in equine behavior, and just so happened to win the 2024 Road to the Horse World Championship of Colt Starting. And he's written a book called Starting in the Middle: How Horses, Those Who Study Them, and 265 Minutes with One Colt Helped Me Find Myself at Midlife. That's packed with so much good reflection and wisdom from a man finding himself again at midlife. I'm excited to continue sharing the goodness that's available when we build relationships and partner with horses, and I'm grateful that Tik is here to help me. So, welcome to the New Masculine, Tik.
Thank you, Travis. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm pretty excited to be here chatting with you.
Is there anything else you want to share about yourself before we get into the meat of the conversation?
Horses are something I've done my whole life, and it's something that I'm continuing to understand and grow and be interested in. And now this is a whole new part of my life, midlife, this conversation about masculinity. And I'm just excited to be here having it with you.
I think part of what I love, just having read your book, so much of your perspective on the continued learning and growing, I really value that in that. And we'll get into it as we get into our conversation. But I don't always find the horse world is continuing to learn and grow and find new ways and continue to evolve. I find a lot of sometimes people that are horsemen find they've found their way and they found the right way to do it, even though there's thousands of ways to do it. And they've just kind of anchored into their way. So I love that continuous growth mindset that you have and you clearly articulate in the book.
Thank you very much. I think I'd be curious, if there's ever been some kind of study to see, whether somebody has a traditional mindset or a more progressive thinking mindset, whether that's more or less common in the horse world than in the general population at large. But I do find that specifically in certain disciplines, like dressage or show jumping, that have been around for a long time, and there's a lot of tradition and history associated with it. And I think the tough part at least it's one of the tough parts for me to navigate, is recognizing that in the tradition and history, there can be a lot of good things.
Yeah.
And also there's some things that maybe should be left in history.
Yeah. Well, we'll unpack that a little bit more as we get into this. In the book, we get to hear a little bit about your own process at midlife, the sort of like where you were at and where you were developing into in the lead up to the World Championship of Colt Starting. And so I also want to take it a little bit further back and go into your childhood, learn into your boyhood, find out a little bit more about who you were and what created you as the man you are now. So when you think of your boyhood growing up, what are some of the things that stick out to you? Either the people, the experiences, the positive, the negative, the things that you were growing up learning as a boy about what you needed to be as a man.
Yeah. Looking back now, I think we all probably, at the time, we think what we're going through is normal. We don't have a gauge of other kids around the world to see if what we're doing is any way unique or how common it is what we're doing. When I look back now, one of the biggest influences was probably that my mother really ran the ship. It's what it was what would call sort of a matriarchy. And, my dad is very smart and intelligent and a good rider. But when it came down to it, I think we all knew that my mother was running the show and she was going to she was going to have the final say in a lot of stuff. And I think I think partly because of that, myself and my two brothers all ended up marrying what I would think of as very strong women. not shying away from a decision, not getting run over by a man in any sense of the word or at any time. The other big influence in my life was horses
Yeah.
and animals and nature from a very young age. And in particular, the world that I grew up in was a world of pony club and English riding. You know, when I talk about English riding, show jumping, dressage, 3-day eventing. And both my parents rode growing up. And I can remember, on one hand, really loving it, and on the other hand, feeling like even probably by the time I got to like 10 or 11 years old, feeling like this was something that most kids did not do. You know, I went to in high school from grades 8 to 12, I went to an all boys school, and out of the 500 kids there, I'm pretty sure I was the only one that was riding horses, and I was definitely the only one whose father picked him up after school wearing tight, beige riding pants and tall boots.
Riding pants.
Yeah, yeah, like the joggers, the tight riding pants, and he'd pick me
Yeah.
up there, and I'd be kind of like, "Oh my god, Dad, why are you picking me up like this?" And now, now I have two kids, and now I will sometimes wear riding pants when I pick my kids up from school. So it's come
Passing along the childhood trauma.
exactly. Yeah. So now it's come full circle, and then I'd say probably the third thing is, my family wasn't very religious in the sense of what we think of as sort of a typical North American or Christian upbringing, but we did try to take moments in nature to be together as a family. And for a long time, I went to a Unitarian church. The idea behind the Unitarian church is that it has its basis in a Christian religion, but they've taken out almost all references to God or
Mm.
Christ. And one of the
Mhm.
things that we would do in our Sunday school is that each day would be about a different religion. So one day we might learn about Islam, another day we might learn about Judaism,
Mm.
another day we might learn about Zoroastrianism. And because there was no sort of defining thing that you had to believe in something, technically, I think there's people that argue that Unitarianism isn't even really a religion because there
Mm.
is no sort of mandatory thing saying you have to believe in anything. It's just kind of
Mhm.
it's probably one of the most hippie religions you could kind of come up with.
Yeah. Um, so is it my understanding that you got into horses because of the family you grew up in? They weren't like it wasn't something you necessarily consciously chose as a child. They were just around.
Correct. There were horses in the backyard. Both my parents rode every day. Myself and my
Got it.
two brothers were all in pony club. When I look back, I cannot remember a moment where I was ever learning to ride. I just remember growing up around horses and riding
You were just
horses, and it
riding.
was
Yeah.
just a thing. That way that some people say they can't remember learning how to swim, or
Uh-huh.
it was just kind of like that. We just grew up around them.
It's so interesting. You and I have such different experiences of entering into the horse world. And I didn't grow up around horses. I maybe rode a couple times. I can think of one time visiting my mom's cousin in northern Arizona, and we went horseback riding on her horses. And I was on a horse that got spooked, and it tried to run while I was on it. And I stayed on, but it was totally scary, but didn't create fear in me where I was like, oh, I never want to ride horses. I just didn't have the opportunity. But I had a mom that grew up with a horse into her teenage years and talked about it, but I didn't have my own experiences. And literally until I was just finishing grad school was my first time getting in a round pen with a horse, and I didn't know what I was doing, and it was like 2010. So we have such different vantage points where I can remember the moment that my relationship with horses started and where my life went. And yours is like they've just always been there. It's the water you've been swimming in.
Yeah. Tell me about in grad school. Tell me how that happened with the round pen.
It was a messy part of my life. I think I may have told this story before, but the kind of high level of it is I was still not comfortable with myself and my sexuality, and I was struggling to come out, but needed to come out. And part of that was I was a social worker working as a behavior coach for kids. And so I was working with kids on sort of behavioral development stuff, but I was given a case. I was an intern at this time, by the way, and I was given a case where a young man, 16, was trying to kill himself because he was gay and Mormon and couldn't reconcile the difference between what his religion was telling him and who he was. And I panicked as soon as I read the sort of like file. And okay, a couple of things. First, that's not for an intern. And second, that's not for behavior coaching. That's therapy that's needed in those moments. Um, but I panicked because I wasn't out and I was struggling with myself. And I really felt like if I can't figure this out for myself, how am I going to help this kid? And I walked into one of my professors at the during my grad school. I walked into her office not knowing anything about her. I just needed to talk, and I just fell apart. And it was like the first person outside of a guy who I dated in the closet for a long time. It's the first person I really talked to about my sexuality, and I created a great friendship with her. And at one point during my birthday, she gifted me a session with somebody who does the now Equus coaching work that I do, and I didn't know what I was getting into. I just knew and trusted this professor and knew that I was struggling and that she thought this might be helpful. And so I remember getting into a round pen and finding more of myself and also finding how much of me was still in presentation mode in the world. I was like presenting to the world what I needed to be rather than really truly showing up. And that horse showed it to me so quickly. How ineffective I was at building a relationship with a being from that disconnected place, from that perfectionism, from that performance. And so it was a moment where I said yes to something that I didn't understand or know. And it was something that pivoted my life in such a big way from there on.
And after that first experience with the horse, were you like you had one experience and you're immediately like, I want this to be part of my life going forward? Or did it take a little bit to kind of get the ball rolling?
I knew, okay, so I didn't really understand at that point the coaching. I just gotten a master's degree as a social worker. So I was pretty like, my mindset was I'm going to be a social worker. And so I didn't really understand the coaching part yet, but I did recognize how much I liked standing next to a horse and the presence I felt in that moment. And so I emailed the woman that did the session for me and I was like, hey, if you ever need anybody to like scoop horse manure or walk horses to and from your sessions, I'd be happy to help. And nothing came of about it at first, but then about a couple years later, I ended up moving with that person and that professor of mine to California to run to like train in this work and to run a ranch where we were offering personal development and corporate development retreats utilizing the Equus coaching experience. So I got kind of dove in a couple of years later, as I was finding that my social work path wasn't quite as fulfilling as I thought it might be. So it's quite a journey to get there, but it was something in my life that I didn't script, that I couldn't have chosen because I didn't even know it was an option. And life gave it to me. And I was like, okay, yes. And once I said yes the first time, it was pretty clear that I was going to be down this track. I didn't really have a choice, even though I was making the choice. So I loved having my experience of having life go, here's where you're going. And it also felt good to me to say yes to it. So it aligned for me in a really positive way and helped me develop a new sense of community and a belonging and okayness in myself. And I credit a lot of horses to that. What are some of the early experiences you had with horses? Like we were talking a little bit about my early experiences. Like what are the ones that do stick out to you, even though you don't remember like learning to ride? What are the
Yeah.
memories that do stick out?
The most what sticks out the most probably wasn't until I was over 10 years old. I was probably 12 or 13 years old, and I got involved with a horse sport called mounted games or Prince Philip games. And these are teams of 4 people and 4 horses. So, a combination, one horse rider combination. And it's restricted, at the time that I did anyway, it was restricted to people under the age of 16. So
Mm,
the oldest kids, the ones you really looked up to, they'd be 16 years old. And most of us were a lot younger than that. Some, I may have gotten started when I was 8 or 9 years old. And it's a really unique horse sport, especially compared to what I do now, in that it's very collaborative. And a lot of what we do, in 3-day eventing and dressage is it tends to bring out the perfectionist in you. You're always
mm,
looking for more. You're always looking for better. You're always looking for a horse that's more on the bit or through or more supple, or, you're always looking to go from a 6 to 7 or 7 to 8 on the dressage scoring out of 10. And in mounted games, you really relied on your pony a lot. You really relied on your teammates a lot. And everything was about having a purpose. Like we're trying to go from point A to point B, or we're trying to pick up this tennis ball off the ground and put it in the bucket at the end. And everything, just looking back on it, but even at the time, I think everybody just had sort of a light, joyful feel about it. It was very much a game. The horses got a break in between each thing, and I just like the things I remember from that. Riding bareback, the joyfulness on it. I think it's very easy to lose that if you get involved in high performance sport as you get
Hmm.
older. And it often reminds me to think back to that and try to have the fun in it and try to have a sense of purpose in it, and not get a not try to be too much of a perfectionist about things with horses.
Interesting how both of our first memories of interacting with horses pointed out the relationship to perfectionism and how easy it is to slip into that and how to like sit back into the joy of something, the connection of something. And it makes sense to me because I think as a broader culture, we are also aligned with what you were saying of like it can teach you to want more and just get the softer and the better horse and the more and more like capitalist
Yeah.
societies really teach us that more is better and to keep going for it. So it makes sense that it would be easy for most of us to fall into that. And yet how much of burnout that creates in so much of us.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely a balance that can be very difficult for me to find between um, wanting to improve at something and have purpose in something in a healthy way, and getting goal oriented or being a perfectionist in a way that feels unhealthy.
Hmm.
And it can be very difficult to find that balance.
I think I'm in one of those phases myself right now. Before we started this, I was telling you a little bit about some of the business development and business building stuff that I'm doing, both in my own business and for the coach training I teach for. And I can feel that part of me kicking back in that's about perfectionism, that's quite rigid, that's intense in a way that isn't really serving me. It keeps me up at night. It keeps me feeling guarded around my energy. It makes me feel like worry about things. I can feel myself struggling with that same pattern of like, okay, where's that balance? Where's the stretching and growing that I intended with this, but with the balance of the fun of the process in the meantime?
And did you ever have a, a mantra or a saying or a motto that you tell yourself when you're struggling with that?
I find personally mantras don't really work for me. I find
Hmm.
I'm already too verbal of a person
Yeah.
that is just more verbal noise, and I
Hmm.
don't think that's true for everybody. And so I
Hmm.
actually often anchor back to that first time in the round pen with a horse where I felt the separation between me and that horse. So it's I go into the feeling state that I
Hmm.
felt that showed me how my perfectionism and performance was getting in the way of me actually being able to connect and to feel that joy. So for me, it's more of a feeling state that I return to that I can go back to that moment in 2010 really quickly. Really, I can get back into that round pen and be present with that, and that can help shift it. But I have to remember to connect with that sometimes. And I think I'm in that phase of sometimes forgetting to, for sure.
I love the idea of not always thinking in words, and to think sometimes in feelings, some people think in pictures or music, or a different way of going through an experience. I was reminded of that recently. I was lucky enough to meet Temple Grandin for lunch,
Mm. Hmm.
who's
Tell
you
the
know
listener who Temple Grandin is, just so that they
yeah,
know.
Temple Grandin is an amazing lady. I think she's probably, at a guess, maybe in her, I want to say 70s, maybe early 70s now, at a
That sounds
guess.
about right.
And she's written, probably over 15 books. Probably about half the books are about animal behavior, in particular to do with cattle or pigs or the slaughterhouse industry. And about half her books are about autism. And that's because
Hmm.
she grew up and is currently, some people describe it as autistic. Some people say a person with autism.
Hmm.
And that was actually an interesting conversation I had with her. I said, do you think do you prefer saying you're autistic or a person with autism? And she believes, for her personally, that if you could wave a magic wand and say you could not be autistic, would she have that magic wand be waved? And she says no. She said it's part of who she is, and she wouldn't trade the experiences she's had, to be what she calls like a normal person. She believes because she thinks in pictures, which is what made me think of it. She has a sort of a gift that other people don't have. On the other hand, she gives an example in one of her books of somebody else that if you could wave a magic wand, they would have it waved. You know, they believe they're a person that has all these things, and then they have this sort of disability of autism. And so it really comes down, like a lot of things, to the personal choice. But the
Mm,
amazing thing about her, and there's a great movie about her starring Claire Danes, if anybody hasn't
mhm.
seen it, it's so good, uh, is that she has, you know, more than I think anybody else in history or in the world today, definitely in the United States, has changed how slaughterhouses operate. And she's made it so that there's still death. Obviously, you know, people are eating meat, but she's gotten rid of a lot of the suffering and the confusion and the anxiety and the stress that these animals go through, leading into their final moments. And she's had to overcome a lot of obstacles on the way to getting her PhD, and then on the way to getting these jobs. With some of the biggest universities and corporations around the world. Today, McDonald's and Costco are two of our biggest clients.
Wow. So tell me about the lunch you had with her.
So, I teach about 15 to 20 clinics a year, usually 2 or 3 day clinics where I travel around the United States and sometimes out of the States to Canada or England or Scotland. And I had somebody reach out from Colorado, the university, and they said, "Are you interested in doing a clinic here?" And it's a little bit further than I would go, and I had some other stuff on the calendar. And then I'm reading the email, and I see at the bottom, Colorado, and my mind's kind of going like, "Isn't that where Temple is based?" And so I wrote back. I said, "Do you know Temple? Is she around there?" And it turns out Temple's at that same university as this riding
Mm,
instructor was asking for me to teach the clinic. And I said, "You know what? I'm going to definitely make the time to come out there. And what I really appreciate is if the opportunity is there for me to have a meeting with Temple." And they ended up arranging a meeting where we met at a Mexican restaurant, and I sat across the table from her, and I was able to ask her. It lasted about an hour and a half, maybe a little bit more, and I was able to ask her any questions that I wanted.
what a gift. What a
It
lovely
was it was it
experience.
was truly special. In the horse world, there's some people that we think of as these famous horsemen like Ray Hunt and Tom
Uh-huh.
Dorrance and just these sort of icons or legends in the sport. And a lot of those people have passed away before I'd gotten the
Mhm.
chance to meet them. And so now when I have the opportunity to meet somebody that has a big influence, or I've been really impacted by their writing or their speeches or whatever, then I try to make if I can, the chance to meet them.
Interesting to think about. Do you think of yourself as one of those people? Having
No.
won a world championship, having having written some books,
No.
talking about
No.
equine behavior, shifting the way that we all uh, relate to these animals based on your own journey with it. Do you ever see yourself that way?
No, I think it's pretty hard to think of somebody in their 40s on that level. These people have
Okay.
decades more experience than I do, and interacting with the world and being a professional or a master horseman or a master animal behaviorist. Uh, I mean, I don't know how it feels to you to be in your 40s, Travis, but I still feel still don't feel that
It's
grown up half the time.
It's brand new to me, and so I'm still figuring it out. I just turned in April, so so yeah. I just think it's interesting because I think it's all relative, this whole thing about someone's impact on the world. Like, as someone who's comes in through the horse world, through the human psychology part of things, and through equine assisted learning, that's not really involved in the world of training horses, that's not really involved in competitions in any sort of way. Like, you could seem like that to me as someone who has horse knowledge, but also like the amount of experience, the amount of research you've done, the amount of different styles and approaches you've done and changed over time. You could easily seem like that to me, even though you're in your 40s.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say. Can you think of? I'm trying to think of who, if I were to meet somebody and there was sort of that level of having somebody on a pedestal that I'd be super excited to meet. There's some people I can think of in the horse world. There's some people I can think of in the literary world. There's some authors that I'd be like pretty tongue tied if I got to meet
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
Uh, what about you? Is there anybody that comes to mind?
I don't think so because I think some a value of mine is being able to treat everyone the same. And I think there are some people that if I met them, I wouldn't know how to show up and treat them the same as I treat everybody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel like an exchange that I'm interested in. Like,
Mm,
that doesn't necessarily feel like something I'm going for. I do have those, like, I would get tongue-tied, I would feel
hmm
like, "Holy," and part of that's because I would pedestalize them.
hmm
I would hand over power in some ways, and so I'm more interested in relationships that where I know how to stay in my power and to
mm.
empower them at the same time.
I guess where I'm thinking it would might be intriguing for me for some of these people is that um they have knowledge that I would be interested in acquiring. You know, like
Mhm,
I would come in if I were to able to meet some of those people, I would come in with like a list of questions. You know, I,
mhm,
I remember the first time I saw Jonathan Field, who's a really fantastic horseman and liberty trainer. And it was the first time where I'd really seen somebody work on a high level with horses at liberty. And it
mm,
kind of gave me some goosebumps. And it was the first time where I watched somebody work with a horse and I was just so speechless. And my feeling kind of was like, I want some of what he's got. Like I
mhm.
want to have some of that feel, some of that warmth, some of that knowledge, some of that skill.
So you, from what I know of you, having read your book, like you are a knowledge gatherer. You're a curious person. You want to ask a lot of questions. You don't put any artifice up in terms of trying to prove yourself with other people. And man, this episode is going to be very interesting because people are going to get an insight to like my own personal work through our conversation. I think that's where I still struggle sometimes as a the little gay boy in me that felt like he wasn't enough still sometimes tries to move into performance and proving himself rather than being able to be in that curiosity place when I'm in relationship with certain kinds of people. And that's my work to do, which is like where I give my power over to people and where I lose the curiosity, the ability to learn from someone because I'm trying to show up and get their approval.
Have you ever done acting or performance or anything like that?
I was a musician for a long time, so
hmm
did both concert, orchestra, and then did marching band for quite a long time. So I've been a part of performance in the music realm, but not in the acting form.
I spoke with uh, an actor the other day,
Hmm.
and we were talking about vulnerability and speaking in front of a crowd or speaking to somebody that was you felt maybe a little bit uncomfortable speaking to, and she said that what she does is she resorts or she feels much more comfortable playing a role, like
Yeah.
you know what I mean, like something on television or acting on stage. Like she says she could stand in front of that crowd or play a role, on camera or whatever, and she feels like that's like her defense mechanism, and that's how she feels like she can do it. And she asked me, if I feel like playing a role helps me, and I thought about it and I was like, absolutely
No
not.
way.
That would make me feel worse because I feel like not talented at playing a role. I feel
Uh-huh.
like, when it comes to singing or acting or drama, I would feel very subconscious. And my defense mechanism, is almost the more worried I get, the more I try to feel like my defense mechanism is to be authentic.
Mm,
Because then nobody can argue with that. Really, like, if you just
wow.
show up and you're just really who you are, um, I actually feel like there's less to criticize because it's just who you are. It's just like a fact.
You might be the first person I've ever heard say that their defense mechanism is to move more into authenticity. Do you feel like you've always been that way, or is that a skill you've
No,
learned over
no,
time?
no. I had to learn that a little bit. When I was in high school and university, I couldn't speak in front of a crowd at all. I managed to somehow I don't know how I did this, but I managed to get through all through high school and through 5 years of university without ever doing any public speaking. I'd not signed up
Uh-huh.
for those classes or I'd skip school
Uh-huh.
that day, whatever it took. And as I got more, with my career, which involves public speaking, that was one of my greatest fears. I had to really study that and talk to people. And somehow through, hearing things or or reading things or studying things, that came to sort of be the defense mechanism, is speak about what you know and be who you are. And when you show up like that, there's nothing that anybody can say that, yeah,
I think
I
there's
don't
some
know.
powerful wisdom in that while that feels natural to you at this point, I don't think is necessarily something that experience in myself nor see in a lot of other men, which is to lean more into authenticity. I think so many of us are, when we feel vulnerable, we move into either avoidance or putting the pressure on by like moving into the conflict and trying to prove ourselves and to gain power in that way. And I just don't know that I've heard that voiced in that way. And it's definitely something I really value and can consciously choose sometimes, but it's definitely not
Hmm.
my default mode to move into more authenticity when I feel triggered or when I feel unsafe or when I feel disempowered in some way. It's really powerful. Thank you for actually saying that. I think that's really going to be helpful for other people to think of a new model for what to do when they feel that when they feel that.
And my guess, if I look back at about how I did it, is just like how you're describing. You have to consciously choose it. Is I think at the beginning, my default, while not acting, would be to go silent and disengage. You know, and I think by choosing authenticity, sort of like how you said, you can consciously choose it. By choosing it over and over again, just like practicing anything else, it gets easier.
Yeah. I think my relationship with horses is what's allowed me to be able to choose that more often because it's easier when the human element is taken out of it and it's just me relating to an animal somehow. While there is physical safety concerns that come up with a horse, I don't experience the ability to feel rejected by a horse. I don't feel the ability
Mm.
to feel like there's a power differential between us. I can understand why a horse might experience a power differential with me, but I don't necessarily experience it myself. And so in moments where I do feel either triggered or like something's not working or judgment in my relationship with the horse, I can choose in those moments because the human element's taken out of it. And that's why I love doing the work that I do is the being in a relationship with a horse gives us a place to practice that has the human parts taken out of it. We get to experiment with new ways of being, coping in different ways, defending in different ways, and then build the bridge for what would that look like in our relationships with other humans. But horses are just so magical and amazing at sort of being authentically themselves and responding to what they feel and not telling a story about it. And therefore, you get real clear and non judgmental feedback about how you're showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times when people are new to horses, maybe not a lot of times, but occasionally when people are new to horses, one of the things that I hear is somebody will say, I pay for my horse's vet care. I bought my horse. I saved it. I'm feeding it every day. I'm spending all this money on it. Why isn't the horse returning
Mm,
the favor? Like, why isn't the
mhm,
horse giving me what I want? And with horses, that transactional relationship like that doesn't work. A
right.
horse is going to do what, how they, first of all, they're going to do what they feel, how they're going to show how they're feeling, first of all. And second of all, they're going to do what they've been taught to do, not what you hope they're going to do or what you feel like they should do.
Mhm,
So, how you make them feel is basically the start of your entire relationship with a horse. And they're not going to come in like a lot of dogs. Like you take a dog and you put him out in the backyard and shut the door. That's going to be like almost a punishment for most dogs. You take a horse and you put him back in his grass field. That's going
oh,
to be a
thank goodness.
reward for the horse. And so a horse compared to a dog is a little bit different because you got to
Yeah.
earn your way on average a little bit more. You got to make them feel almost as good as the company of other horses or a field full of grass is going to feel for them to sort of choose to be with you.
I think that's what I love about horses is they are the animal that we interact with as humans commonly or somewhat common for many people, but they're not the kinds that like the dogs and the cats that we bring into our houses. But horses have their own communities, their own sense of what their needs are, their own sense of social dynamics differently than some of the animals we have in our house are. And so we get to like engage with some of the same systems that we engage with as humans, but from a very different model. And we get to explore how we're showing up and if the way we've been trained and taught is working for us, or if there's another model that would be available. So I love that concept that you're bringing up, that like they help us think about things in very different ways than what we're traditionally patterned to think about.
Yeah. Most animals that we interact with are much more domesticated than horses. When we think
Yeah.
about dogs or cats or pigs or cattle or bunny rabbits, or, these are animals that have often been bred and been domesticated to a much greater extent than horses. Most horses, aside from some of the extreme breeding we see, most horses, you could let them go out on the prairies, in Canada, the United States, and they would survive.
Hmm.
They're a lot closer to interacting with a wild animal than most things that we get to experience on a day-to-day basis.
Mm. Yeah. I think this is kind of a natural, nice segue into talking about some of your book and some of the lessons that are in there. So your book is called Starting in the Middle. What do you want to share about it first before I pepper you with some questions about all the learnings I had in it?
Well, I guess a little background about it for people that are listening. So first of all, uh, the 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 premise or the beginning, the genesis of the idea and of the book is the competition Road to the Horse. And that is horse. Nowadays, most people are calling it horse starting. It used to be what we would call horse breaking. Sort of where we take a horse that's never really been around people at all or very much, and we get them used to being caught, being handled, being touched, being saddled, being maybe bridled, and maybe ridden. And that's sort of the starting process. And mostly what we see when we watch horse sports, when we watch dressage or show jumping or eventing or reining or cutting, or even thoroughbred racing like the Kentucky Derby, what we're watching is the culmination of many hours of practice that we have not seen. All this practicing and training that goes on behind the scene at the person's barn. The idea with Road to the Horse is that starting horses for centuries has been seen more as a trade than as a sport or an art.
Hmm.
And somebody about 25 years ago had the idea that starting horses actually can be an art in itself. It's not just a trade. Like, even the same way that if you look at carpentry or plumbing, there's people that treat it simply as a trade, and there's people that study it and get better and get artistic, and they come up with creative solutions, and they almost take this trade and create it into an art. And
Hmm.
that's the idea with starting the horses, is how could we show off some of the best colt starters around the world and make it into a competition? Hopefully, what the organizers want every year is that people don't get too caught up in the competition, and it still has an idea of, we're trying to create art rather than compete, and we're trying to show this off to the public so that they can be inspired and they can also learn. Um, but the competition is every March at the Kentucky Horse Park over 3 or 4 days with 3 or 4 competitors. And we have basically 4 hours to take a horse that's been virtually unhandled and see how far we can get with them. Can we be riding them by day 3 and riding them maybe even around an obstacle course? And on top of that, you have close to 10,000 people watching. You have it being live streamed all around the world. You have 5 judges judging your every move. And you have over $100,000 in prize money.
Wow. Some high stakes.
Yeah. Yeah.
High stakes art form.
It's really nerve wracking. Yeah. I mean,
Uh-huh.
it's the most nerve wracking thing I've ever done in my life. And when I got invited to compete in June of 2023 to compete in March of 2024, right on that day that they invited me, I decided, I've been wanting to write a second book for a while, and this is going to be it. This could be it.
Mm.
And I started taking notes. And so right from the very beginning, I was, I'm not always journaling or keeping a diary or anything like that. But right from the very beginning, I kept a journal, and I took notes almost every day on what I was doing to prepare for it, both physically in terms of cold starting, but also mentally and emotionally to prepare myself for that moment.
I think that's what I loved about the book, is it's so much about your own process. And I think getting to get inside and learn about another man's process, there's so much I was able to learn from being able to see your process of fact finding, of exploring different modalities, of bumping up against your own edge, noticing where you've put too much pressure on yourself and created injury. There's so much that I got to learn from witnessing another man's process. I think the competition element to the road to the horse adds some stakes in it that make it really interesting. I think sometimes, especially in our current culture, like without some stakes to it, we don't really have the attention span to to follow through with someone's process and the slow development that happens over time. So I think it's a nice balance of being able to be in that sort of developmental phase with you and learning about your process, but also having enough stakes in it to actually make it like move forward and push a little
Yeah,
bit.
I think the stakes are a necessary part of it in that way that you're describing, because a lot of people that are, there's are criticisms of Road to the Horse that starting a horse,
Yeah.
number one, shouldn't be a timed thing. It should just take the time it takes, and number
Yeah.
two, certainly shouldn't be a competition, and that we should just be starting horses slowly and for the art of it and to enjoy the process. But I agree with you. If we took three people and we just said, okay, we're just going to start these horses, and there's no timeline and there's no prize money and there's no judging, would you still have 10,000 people showing up to watch?
Yeah, not in our current culture, at least.
No.
I think that's what you pointing out that there's some criticism of the road to the horse. I think that's what I appreciated almost the most about this book was how much you spent time reflecting on the ethics and the dilemma that's created in this sport, in this art form, and that you took in many people's viewpoints on it from all the way to from someone who believes that like basically working with any animal is abuse to the other side of things where like people have been doing it their whole lives and there's you need to put pressure on the animal and stuff. And so now where you're at after your exploration of that ethical dilemma, where do you land personally about this sport, about horsemanship? Like where do you land?
I'd say the most important thing to me is that as soon as I talk to anybody that has a viewpoint that they feel 100% is right, or that feels very polarizing or defensive, I think it's not a helpful conversation to have. I think we can continue to evolve and change all horse sports. But for me, the starting point is basically exactly what we're doing right now, which is people having a conversation about it and continuing to ask questions about it. And I think as I get more educated by studying this, I would like to think that my role when I'm helping other people is to, yes, maybe give them some skills and say this, doing this could be helpful, but more than that, to encourage them to ask questions and maybe
Yeah.
help them figure out the words for the questions they're wanting to ask that they can't even put into words. And in the end, working with horses to me is a lot. I have two kids, a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it's a lot like parenting, and that there's no two parents that are going to raise kids exactly the same way. One kid is going to be playing in the tree, and one parent is going to say, be careful. One parent's going to let the kid do whatever they want. One parent's going to tell the kid to get down. And depending on the tree and the height and the day, like everybody has a different line for where that is. And working with horses a little bit like that. And I recognize that how I work with a horse is maybe, on a spectrum, it's here, wherever that here is. And there's other people that are going to work with a horse faster than me or slower than me or put more pressure on than me or put less pressure on than me or use more positive reinforcement or more negative reinforcement. And the most important part for me is that if somebody's not willing to have a conversation about what they're doing, I don't think that's a person that I necessarily I'm going to want to have the conversation with them or respect their way of doing things or endorsing it. If they're doing it differently, that's fine, but I want to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, I think there's a lesson in this that I want to kind of help bridge the gap into the framework that I'm talking about in masculinity that you and I were talking about. Like sometimes your defense mechanism is to move into authenticity. Well, I think I see a lot of men, and I can see it in myself too, where when we feel uncertain about something or feel vulnerable in some way, we move into false certainty and we cope in that way. And I love this lesson that you're talking about, which is let's get curious and ask a question in that moment to find out more information rather than moving into like a defended certainty. How do we develop the skill set of finding out what's the question I'm trying to ask? Because I notice in myself, I'm unclear sometimes about our relationship to horses, like coming in the direction that I came in. None of the work I do involves riding. It's all on the ground, it's all face to face. It has some of the control mechanisms, but many of the control mechanisms that we use with horses are taken away. And so I find myself not really interested in riding at this point in my life. I don't have judgments of other people, but I don't also desire to have that relationship with the animal with me up on top. And the way you described it in the book is so beautiful about the connection, and I can see the value of it. So I don't have judgments of others, but I sometimes get twisted up around there's this animal that in some ways we've changed its lifestyle quite a bit, and sometimes not for the better. Like their digestive tracts are so damn sensitive because of the shift we've done in their grazing
Mm-hmm.
and their natural ways of finding resources. Um, and yeah, I get in conflict. Like we're here, we have domesticated horses, we have horses that are in these things. So how do we want to interact with them? And so I like this approach that you're saying, which is like move into curiosity, into questions,
Mm-hmm.
learn from each other. And you model that so beautifully, and that you don't correct anybody that you talk to, and you don't try to get them to see it the way you do. And I think so much of the way that we as men interact with each other is trying to get each other to see it the same way we do.
There's a lot of ethical questions to do with horses, to do with anything, animals, horses, people. But what I'm studying is horses, and the questions of, should we have horses in captivity? Should we be riding horses? How should we be feeding horses? Should we use a bit with horses? Should we use a saddle with horses? Should we use a crop or a whip with horses? Uh, with all of those questions, I see the same sort of spectrum of answers. Is you can have polarizing viewpoints where people are like, we should always do something or we should never do something, and I just often find, not always, but I often find the answer is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. It reminds me of something I find myself talking a lot with my clients about, especially in our current world and our current landscape that can feel really polarizing, tribal, divisive,
Yeah.
brittle. I find myself talking about to my clients about like the concept of like how can two truths be true at the same time, even when they sometimes feel in opposition to each other. And what happens when we sit with allowing the friction to happen between those two truths and find where they can actually find a place to settle together.
I used to experience that a lot, and I still do occasionally with horses. But I find when somebody gets into the horse world and they start to learn from two different camps, you have the
Hmm.
the this method of training horses, and you have this method of training horses, and on the surface level, it can seem like they're in complete opposition to each other and they contradict each other. But when you can look beneath the surface, uh, there's a way to see that both can be true at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple parts of the book that I want to talk about your or own sort of development because I resonate with them. And there was a part where you talked about, like, as you were considering whether to do the road to the horse or not, the doubt that creeped in about you and having to declare whether you're good enough to actually do that. Can you tell me a little bit about your own process of how you moved through your doubt to be able to show up in that competition?
Yeah, this was especially difficult for me to do because there were some people that I really respected in the horse world and in my own personal life that basically either told me I shouldn't do it or that they didn't approve of the competition.
Uh-huh.
People like David O'Connor, people like my father, people like Janet Jones, who wrote Horse Brain, Human Brain, people like Warwick Schiller, who has a great podcast, which you may have listened to.
Hmm.
And all these people have either said maybe I shouldn't do it uh, or the competition itself isn't even a great thing to be like existing. And so there were a lot of doubts and there were a lot of fears. And at the very kind of pit of me, there was this little, I guess, this little flame that kept thinking like, this is something you can do. This is something you can do. And I remember reading a book. The book was about writing. And as part of the book, he wants new writers to basically write down this phrase and sign it, which is basically something like, I will never again let fear stand in the way of something I truly, truly desire to do. And so I had all these fears about it, but I had this little tiny flame thing. I thought I could do it. And I started, where my thinking happens is usually either when I'm writing or when I'm running. I try to run 3 times a week in the woods. And then also speaking with my wife, in the evening over a drink. And
She's really cool, by the way, based on how you the story you tell about her. She's cool and
she's
wise,
she's
and
she's very amazing, and she's very wise. And it was never an easy decision, and it was never something that just magically kind of appeared and I just drew a lot of strength on it. It was just like this little tiny flame that was just wouldn't go out, just that kept kind of saying, this is something that if you really put your mind to it, you could probably do it.
such a beautiful version, like sort of an evolved version of how to use like traditionally masculine energy to believe in yourself, to go after something, to achieve something, even though there's voices on either side of you saying, don't do it. Like it's not about conquering or beating or taking power from those people or telling them they're wrong. It's just listening to that inner voice that knows where you're going. I think that's really beautiful. Yeah.
That inner voice is on one hand, I find it very difficult to listen to, and on the other hand, I find it very easy to listen to. I don't even know how to
Uh-huh.
describe that. It's going to show you the right path, but it's not always going to show you the easiest path.
Yeah, exactly. And we live in a pretty external feedback and externally referenced world. And so it is hard to orient to that inner voice. And yet some of us have no other choice. And so actually would hope that everyone has no choice but to listen to their own inner voice. And yes, of course, take some guidance outside of it, but to not be so dependent on the outside world to tell you who you are and what you need, where you're going. There's another thing that you talked about, and I think it was a conversation you and your dad were having that you talked about in the book, that you talked about this concept of an emotional trap, which was it's easier to practice something you're comfortable with rather than to practice something new. I find myself doing that all the time. Like, I think I'm doing the right thing by practicing something, but I'm already good at those things that I'm practicing, and I'm avoiding the things that are new because I have
Hmm.
to confront my own perfectionism, my own potential failure, my own like being seen as not enough. Like, there's so much confrontational energy for many of us when we consider doing something new. Tell me a little bit about your relationship to that emotional trap.
Well, it's something that I experience with myself and I see all the time at horsemanship clinics. And, when I'm teaching, people will say, oh, this is the way I'm used to doing it, or this is the equipment that I want to use. And, most of the time for those people, I recognize that it can be enough out of their comfort zone just to be in a clinic with a strange clinician in front of a strange crowd that I usually don't uh, push them on it because we want to
Hmm.
sort of increase the degree of difficulty or how much we're out of our comfort zone a little bit at a time. We don't want to go so far out that everything feels overwhelming. We want to go a little bit out to improve. And the more I teach other people, the more it actually gives me skills to teach myself.
Mm,
And that skill of recognizing basically, if I want to improve the fastest, I want to go the most out of my comfort zone I can without going so far that things either get dangerous uh, or it becomes overwhelming, or I can't continue to think my way through it. You can get so far out that your mind kind of goes
yeah.
blank. And with preparing for Road to the Horse, there were some certain skills in cold starting. For those people listening, cold starting is not the main thing I've done throughout my life. It's been riding and jumping horses. And this was something I've had an interest in for almost 15 years, but it's definitely been more of a hobby than something that I've done professionally. And so in that 9 months that I had to prepare, I sort of began by making a list of all the things I wanted to get better at and how I was going to improve and who I was going to take clinics from and listen to. And I made a very kind of particular plan, which was in the first 8 months, I was going to try to take in as many point of views and put myself out of my comfort zone as much as possible. And then in the last month leading up to it, I was going to just incorporate those things that I wanted to incorporate and go back to doing it my way as much as I could. So basically, another way of saying that is in the first 8 months, it's practicing the things I'm weaker on, incorporating what I want, and then the last month, practicing my strengths. And I think for anybody that's preparing for a sport or some kind of intellectual pursuit, um, that really worked for me, and I think it could work in other ways too.
Hmm. Yeah, the way I like to frame that out, what I'm talking with my clients is like there's sort of three zones, and there's the comfort zone in the center where everything we do is we already know everything there. We're practiced at it. We're probably already pretty good at. Then there's the learning zone right outside of
Yeah.
that circle, and that involves some stretching, some discomfort, some self doubt, some worry, some all those kinds of things. And then there's the zone outside of it called the panic zone. It's
Yeah.
where you're panicking, where you're in your fight or flight mechanism, where you might dissociate and leave the experience because your system is overwhelmed. And there's just really very little learning that can happen in the panic
Yes.
zone. And so
Yes.
I always talk about with my clients, like, where are we at in that? Are we getting anywhere close to that panic zone? What can we do to bring it in closer to the comfort zone if we need to, if it's getting too overwhelming? But where are we able to stay for as much time as we need to learn something in the learning zone so that that
Yes.
learning zone now stretches what the comfort zone is, makes it bigger?
I'm assuming that when you work with people and horses, that you can show that same thing with
Yeah,
horses because that's
that's
the
where it comes
same
from.
yeah, same three things with horses.
Hmm.
Um, I think people's I take that back. It depends a lot on the person, but the people can have the ability to make those zones much bigger. Whereas a
Hmm.
horse, being a flight animal, is usually going to be quicker than a person to tip into that place of
Uh-huh.
panic.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And that's when we learn how to navigate that with an external animal, it actually can teach us how to navigate that within ourselves. I think that's a primary way. Like, there's a lot of work being done with veterans with PTSD right now with horses. And I think that's a primary mechanism that goes into why that's so supportive is if you can work with a flighty nervous system outside of yourself and learn to tend to it and be with it and to notice its ups and downs, you might be able to do that with your own flighty nervous system, your own nervous system that tends towards that panic
Yeah.
response quite easily. So I think there's so many cool things that horses can teach us. Couple of quick things I wanted to also say was you talk about your primary strength as a horseman as being able to recognize how horses feel. I love when a man says stuff like that. When you're willing to say that my primary skill set is that I can feel someone else. Like, no leader says that. No CEO says that. Maybe some of the women CEOs out there, maybe some of the female counterparts in our world or feminine aligned counterparts. But I love when a man can claim and own that your primary strength is your ability to feel someone else. And I think it's a lost art in leadership is to actually be able to feel what's going on in the others. And horses are so good at that. They don't have verbal language to talk about things. They don't socialize in the same way, and they rely on feeling the other members of the herd and being very attuned and aware to the community around them. I just wanted to highlight that and say I value that and love that you said that because I think it gives other men permission to lean into developing that as a strength as well.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is that it comes a little bit more naturally for me for horses than it does for dogs or children or other humans. But because I've
Fair.
practiced the skill with horses, I think it's making me better with people and with dogs and with myself as well.
Yeah, I think most of our socialization as men doesn't teach us to have empathy, to be able to put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to be able to feel someone else. So much of our socialization is really more about winning, competing, being successful, being productive, all those kinds of things. And in some ways, in order to do all those things, you kind of have to tune out a little bit of the feeling. The feeling stuff will distract you away from the goal.
Yeah.
And yet, maybe there's an option to reorient what the goal is in our culture. And I think we might be in a time frame where we're struggling against that a bit as a Western culture for sure. The last thing I also wanted to bring forward was as anybody that goes into reading the book, I think one of the gifts that I love to take people into when I'm having them interact with a horse is the level of presence that's required when you're with an animal that's that big. So much presence is required in that space that most of us don't live our life in. We spend so much time worrying about what's already happened or what will happen, the past and the future, that we're not as present as a horse invites us to when we're in relationship to them. And if you're not somebody that has horses or gets to have these experiences, even just reading the the 3 days of the colt starting that you do with Tomcat, your horse that you get paired with, there's
Yeah.
so much presence in that. And, sometimes in movies, we get to see the visual element of, like, the background becoming blurry and only what's in the foreground is in focus, and that's so
Yeah.
much of what's there in your book and just reading it. And I think there's so much power to for people to spend time watching experiencing others or doing it for yourself, learning how to be that present and to feel that much nuance to life. We're so high impact and so moving so fast that we miss out on so much information when we're not present.
When you think of something in your life, whether it's with a person or in nature or with horses or a sport, can you think of the last time you were just extremely, extremely present for something for a prolonged amount of time, like over an hour or two?
I think for me, it's when I'm teaching the Equus coaching work that I do, when I'm at
Yeah.
4-day on-sites, because I'm
Yeah.
operating on all cylinders. I'm teaching, I'm mentoring, I'm coaching, I'm being a horse person. I'm there, like all of me gets to like really fully show up in that. And it's
Yeah.
complex and everybody needs something different and every horse is different. And so I always say I love going to them because I like myself so much better at the end of it because I'm
Yeah.
so present and so firing on all cylinders and not in self-doubt and not in performance and just fully engaged with life. And then I
Yeah.
try to practice like how do I carry that further into my life? And I always inevitably lose it and then need a reminder and come back and lose it and find it and lose it and find it. But I think it does bleed into my life more and more because I practice it so often.
Yeah. What you said about liking yourself more at the end of it, it makes me think about at the end of Road to the Horse, I had made some mistakes. Like I wasn't perfect, as nobody is, but I have a tendency, for this is my career and my passion, that you want it to, especially in front of a crowd, you want it, and I mean, just for so many reasons, you just want it to go perfectly. And I think even though it didn't, a big part of what allowed me to be okay with it not going perfectly or almost forgiving myself for some of the mistakes that I made is that I was present the whole time with
Mm,
that horse over those 3 days. And I think if I'd made the mistakes by being distracted or not being present, it would have been harder
yeah.
to kind of get over it. But by being so present the whole time, it's almost like I was, I don't know, like I was doing my best, I guess, and it's just an easier kind of pill to swallow when you don't win at something, when you feel like you were totally present, than if you can kind of, you just have, I guess, regrets about it if you're not.
Yeah, it's interesting how if even if you had won when you did win in 2024, if you hadn't been present, like it could have been really easy to pick at yourself, even with the
Yes.
actual award. With it, it could or
Yes.
to feel unsatisfied with it,
Yes. Yeah.
and that's because so much of this is the inner work we're doing and the inner story we're telling ourselves. And I think I appreciated so much about your book and was so excited to talk to you because you really get that it's not really about training the horse. It's about you developing as a person. And that's so much about the values I have in the work that I do when I partner with horses is that it's not about training them to do anything. It's about being in a relationship, seeing what comes up for you, seeing what your tendencies are, and letting yourself learn new ways to do it and to be so that you can be proud of yourself, so that you can feel really connected to self, so you can like yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've had such a great time being able to first just read the book. That was such a gift to be able to like dive into a different horse modality and to see somebody doing so much of their own personal work in that process. So just thank you for joining me and thanks for being here to help me continue sharing the power of horses and the relationships with that they offer.
Well, it's been a absolutely a pleasure to chat with you, Travis. And I feel like the time has flown by. So
I
thank you very
know.
much for having me.
I know we could keep going for so long, that's for sure. If people wanted to find your book, wanted to find out more about you, where do they find you out there in the world?
So the book is a great place to start. In the United States, you can get that from Trafalgar Square Books. In the UK, you can get it from Quiller Publishing. And I always recommend, trying to find it first in a brick and mortar store, like a
Yeah.
bookstore or a tack shop. And then Travis, as I'm going to say that. And then there's always the backup of Amazon.
The book is called Starting in the Middle: How Horses, Those Who Study Them, and 265 Minutes with the Colt Helped Me Find Myself at Midlife. Thank you, Tik Maynard, for joining me. And until our next episode.